This is Jessica Altman for the post-conference with Allison Jordan and Bailey Bass.
Okay, so what we will do, we'll kind of talk through evidence that we pulled out in the lesson is and we'll run through the domains pretty quickly. We'll give you the evidence and then just a kind of summary of where you ranked, and then you can ask questions. You can ask questions. Okay.
Oh, great.
Emailed it to y'all, but I just emailed it, so I don't know the wonderful. That's great. So the first domain is pretty easy because we can evaluate prior to going into watch your lessons. So you fall within that proficient category in all of the 1.1 to 1. You plan well with your team. We see your lesson plans. We know that you're using the TEKS to drive your instruction. When we met with you, you could very clearly talk about what we're going to teach in that lesson. Pre-planning, you consider all of the special groups in your class. So all of your consultant anything else.
It's exactly what I had as well. It's just that you presented it all to us. The standards were there, so kind of just all about planning. You could.
So I'm going to actually jump down to domain 4 too, because that's I'm sorry, domain 3. So the learning environment is pretty straightforward. So your routines are very evident. You had talked about how when you pre-planned your reading route, you were going to ask the students to choose whether they want to come to the program, they wanted to stay seated. They were all seated. They were extremely respectful. They were working as you were reading. There was no like off-task behavior. There was no giggling. There was no talking. There was no doodling. They were focused on the task at hand while also watching you read, which tells me that they know what their expectations are. You've established that very clearly ahead of time. There's that mutual respect between them and you. That's very evident in the times where you're transitioning between your small group and then checking in with them. And it's very fluid. It's not that you take a group and you're with them for an extended period of time. You get them started and then you're cutting with your students. One of the things that I did notice is when they were stopped and they would see that you're, okay, now you're transitioning back to individuals, all of a sudden there would be like 2 or 3 or 4 hands up. And so I would challenge you moving forward to think of the routine or procedure for them when they're stuck and you can't get to them immediately. Right. So is it that they check in with their table group or they ask to before you or something like that? So they're just sitting and waiting when they can't use. You had a door greeter greet us and welcome us into the classroom. He had asked us when it was part of your script, he had asked us, would you like to be greeted? And we said, yes, we're here to watch our lesson. And then that kind of fizzled out. He just went, so I think about, you would extend that further and hold the door greeter accountable to that. Okay. Your environment is gorgeous. You have income charts all over your classroom. You have that class contract and your life principles. You have your expectations posted. So again, all of those things that contribute to setting the expectations.
Which were all things I noted. That you had your agenda with the warm-up, you were reading, then you were going to create a food web with your anchor chart, GE expectations, and then kind of what she was saying. I know you had wanted us to kind of watch when you were moving from small group to checking in with the other kiddos. So I kind of had the same thing is, what is the process for when you're with the small group and they have a question? Like, do they just interrupt the small group or do they have like where they grade the me or is there a table leader or something like that?
So for me, there was all ranked between efficient and that control is amazing.
Yeah. Well, and it's especially you're getting to help that you change the procedures, you build those relationships, and it's made it to where they know the expectation and they follow through with it.
I also wanted to point out 1 point Cameron was on his own. And you had said to him, you know, I noticed that you're on your own, do you want to join another group? And he didn't, he was fine, and that was okay, but that tells me you always have your own, and every day you're doing things. You know, they're on your own, you need to get them to collaborate with your peers, but also respect that he made that decision, he was okay. Yeah.
He usually prefers to not work in a group, and so I pick my battles. Sometimes I'm like, no, we're collaborating right now, let's collaborate, but I looked over his paper and I didn't feel like he needed the help from a collaboration, so I allowed him to just continue.
And then your little Mark, he at one point was kind of getting just silly, you know, it wasn't disruptive, but you could see him starting to spiral.
Right.
And you walked over and all you did was put your hand on his shoulder and you said, Mark, do you have all, blah, 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 blah. You know, you just prompted him. And that was all it took to get him right back on things. So I was very impressed with that because sometimes, I mean, one, we know a student like that can disrupt the entire room. But you just increased the proximity and you what worked for the child and it worked.
Yeah, Mark and I have our own thing in class. I'm gonna say his name. And his grouping is really specific at that table because the two girls that he's with are a bit higher, and then Fletcher works really well with him in terms of like I hear Fletcher say, "Come on, Mark, we gotta put our animals down. Come on, Mark, we gotta do this." And so I have him set there specifically because those girls won't get bothered by him, and Fletcher kind of helps me on keeping him in track. And so I've noticed that he gets a lot more done in my classroom than like my partner teachers say that he does.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's been a really focus for me for the last few months. So
It's good to hear, like, he does well when he has an account.
right.
Or he does well when.
And we use checklists a lot more in class, like I left it on the board, and he functions really well with those checklists. And I'm like, have you done the first thing? Yeah, I already done that. Okay, well then what's next? Like, oh,
Visual reference.
Right.
Yeah.
I had students. So before you came, I had a discussion with the class because they were very upset and worried about this. And so I had a discussion with them about showing me what you were looking for. And it made me realize when I was in there that I really had not done anything with them after you. So I did ask some of the students.
oh, that's great.
Yeah. One of them had said, you know, they all had great things to say. One of them specifically, Ms. Bass is a great teacher. It's not that the other teacher was bad, but I'm getting better grades because I understand them. So it wasn't, I like her because my grades are good.
Right.
I like her because I understand.
Right.
And so I just thought that was so powerful. They adore you because they recognize the increase in learning.
Yeah.
So, there you go.
Well, they feel successful. They're feeling a lot more successful, even just since I came. And the ones that are really hard on themselves, or you know, that a lot of tears would come from them. They're like, Miss Pass, like I've got a grade this time. Like I can't look at mine. You did it on your own. Like that's you. And so just them feeling successful is really, I think, boosted like the morale in the classroom environment as well.
Which are building that confidence. Okay, let's jump into domain 2, which is instruction. So that's where the meat of the opportunity begins. So, again, you were focused on your real when we got in there. Several questions throughout the lesson, which we're going to start as we go. You on the board have your materials checklist, so that relates to domain 3 as well, and just student independence and responsibility for materials that you have on the board. And you were very clear on what you were creating as an advice about the book that we just read. And they were thinking about that, sure reading. You had a checklist for what students needed to include in their food chain. And there were lots of words on that list. So one of my thoughts was, as a great support, don't get rid of that, but consider your EVs who now have a list of words that they don't necessarily know and potentially be overwhelming. So that you want to change the words, but you might consider pairing some visuals with those words, and not all of them, but some some of those high leverage words just to make it a little less overwhelming. So typically I do timestamps, and I at the beginning have forgotten to get that timestamp. I can't remember what time did we go around 10:20.
We started at 10:19, you were
Okay.
reading the story in front of her.
Okay,
Right.
so when I started my timestamps, it was 10:27, and at that point you had released everybody and people were on their way to working. There were several students that were asking to see the book, and you had that one copy, and you'd said, well, feel free to use it, and they were passing it. But I started hearing more and more asking for the book, but want to possibly consider making like a digital copy, or at least those permanent pages for them to access in Schoology on their own. In your small group, you would scaffold it for them, you would ask them to plug in the arrows and specifically what those arrows represent. You got the group started, and then you begin circulating with the rest of the class. I had broken off and was working with one small group, and the students were confused about the panther and the beetle. And how is a panther supposed to go inside of a beetle? Right, panther's so big, how does a beetle be panther? How does the energy transfer? The student said, it's so confusing to me because in the book it shows the panther areas, but here it shows the panther alive, and it shows the beetle alive. And so I think that was just a misconception on your paper. The panther's not necessarily alive, but it represents the panther as a whole, right, and what that transfer of energy looks like within the chain.
Yeah, that's been a misconception that, after grading their food chains and then coming back this week, you know, and identifying that a lot of them drew the panther, and then a lot of them drew the dead panther. They said, okay, death, you know, and then they said beetles. And I said, no, if it's a decomposer, it can eat that. We just know that the panther has now passed because a decomposer has now gotten to it. So that's been really targeted this week as we've been finishing the unit. So that was a misconception that I didn't expect for them to not get, because we talked about like they eat organic matter, and we learned in fossil fuels is dead plants and animals.
Right.
Yeah. So that one was trickier than I expected.
I noticed there were students asking about the ant, and then there was one other, was it?
Lizard?
Well, there was confusion between omnivore and carnivore. And so you were referring them back to the book. In the book, what is that animal eating? And I would consider asking them, do some research. Jump on your computers and see.
So,
I mean, that's what it shows in the book, but is that?
That's what I had pointed that out as well. Originally, they were supposed to be creating this on the Chromebook so that they were going to be able to research and pull pictures, but it was televised. So we were limited Chromebook usage.
Right.
And as they began asking me, I was like, oh man, like this is where we were going to have, that's why we were going to be on the Chromebook. Now I'm realizing. Yeah, so I tried to pull like my resources like with a finished one, and I tried to like work them towards it, you know, without saying, okay, you're right, it does only eat a plant, but it also can eat weeds, right? So that one was,
monitoring.
yes. And the same with having the extra book copy, there was a digital one, but we were limited, you know, I wanted to monitor and limit, but it turned out working, I think it worked better that they drew, because a lot of the students liked that they got to sit there and draw their things out. And I think that did more for them. But I do wish that maybe I had like 3 Chromebooks set up, you know, so it's only 3 in the class, it's not the whole class. And then they could have had together, or per table, maybe a Chromebook. That's what I went through and was talking about with Annie yesterday. I was like, we need to have something like that where they will still have the piece to research.
Yeah, it's a great one. And that then would help, you know, and I don't know the answer. Is an ant a true herbivore, or is that just what was shown in the book? And then it also allows for that deeper inquiry, like unintentional inquiry, from letting them kind of investigate something that they're interested You did a really great job of using that auditory reminder to them. Producer,
Mhm.
you know, needs it and plant. You have to remember it. You had the food chain for them going back to your small group now. They have the food chain provided. All the boxes were filled in, the organisms were filled in. They had arrows and images. And so my question was, did you feel as they started working that it was an appropriate level of challenge for them? Or would you have not scaffolded it as much?
I feel that for most of them that were in my small group, there was probably 2 of them that I think would have been successful with the blank page. But for the rest of them, I think in terms of not feeling overwhelmed, because a lot of the kids that are in that small group specifically, a lot of it is that they just feel like, and they don't know where to start on. And so I think that it was appropriate just giving them the organisms, because they just needed to focus on the classification and the transfer of energy. So I think that it went better. And I noted in here too, they worked at a quicker pace than I expected them to. And then they have another, when we're targeting other critiques and things, and I think it is because they were like, oh, I've got my organisms and I know what I'm doing with them now that they're all here. And so I felt that was a pretty good differentiation for that specific group.
Well, I think it also helped with when you were going to monitor the rest of the whole group, because you were able to give them like the task, like break the task down a little differently for them. So they were able to start with the arrows and then draw the organisms and then label whether it was a herbivore, or carnivore, producer, consumer. And then each time you gave them a task, that allowed you the time to go and monitor and check in with your kiddos.
Yeah, because you don't know where to go next sometimes. And so I think that was.
You had, as you were working, you did ask, or as you were circulating, you did ask, does this make any sense to you? What questions do you have? And almost all of the conversation that I observed was on that. There was talking, which we didn't see. It was focused on what they were supposed to be doing. One of the things I would suggest moving forward, you gave them the checklist. So I'm thinking of Katie. She was so excited to be able to have her markers out. And so she started spending more time orienting her arrows than she was with the content. So maybe something, as you're circulating, you notice those kids that are starting to slip, that you start to give them some time, marker examples, in 5 minutes, I want you to have this time, and then 3 more minutes, you need to have this time. Because and she was more than willing to stop what she was doing when I told her to. But she kind of got in that mode and she wanted to continue.
And that was something I kind of made note of as well, was having those time markers or a timer, like you need to be done at this point at this time, because I know after they were supposed to give it a partner and kind of check over it. And so some of them you had, like for example, Cameron was done waiting on a partner. So I think some of those check-in time markers might help some of the other ones just kind of keep pace.
Yeah. And you did it at 10:50. About 23 minutes into their independent part in your small group work that you did the phone check. To figure out what you're doing. And that would probably be a good thing to say. Point in our class period, this is what you need to have. Examine done. And then at the beginning of the lesson, I didn't mention this, but you did have your exit ticket prepared. And I know we had talked in our pre-conference about moving beyond those simple recall questions. And so it was something to put in there and telling 2 things that are one thing that is and I would, on there or not, but extend that to, okay, why is this correct and why is this incorrect?
Yeah, and I think that was because of that conversation. The questions were a little different, because you had those 2 things you see that are done correctly in the food web. List 1 thing that is incorrect in this food web and explain why it is correct. So you can tell you that to feedback, put that justification in there.
And then the last thing I have in there, and you did really good at giving that positive reinforcement. So feedback to kids, especially at this level, is so important. You had said, I like how she's got her separated out and labeled. And so I'd always encourage you to move beyond the just simple positive reinforcement, like, hey, you're doing great, I'm so proud of you. Things to be done that's specific and targeted. I am proud of you as you are, blah, 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 blah. And you did that with this patient, you separated your organisms out, labeled. That way, the kids are sitting around that group can hear, oh, she just got praised because she labeled and organized her organisms.
That's what I need to do. Yeah. And that was something I made note of was feedback. You gave a lot of overall feedback. But that specific feedback, you could tell when you gave that one, like perk up, so that, oh, did I do that? Or, oh, is she coming over here? That was.
So for me, within the second domain, the score level, within proficient, I would say you are really close to moving to accomplished. With the 2.1, I think that's the achieving expectations. I think if you can consistently get those higher level questions and those inquiry opportunities, that's what's going to help you. And so, you know, I think a couple of times it just happened by chance, you know, like with the students seeing boards and boards and on the boards. But pre-plan for those opportunities and pre-plan those questions that you did your exit ticket. Your lesson, and that's what's going to take it to the next level.
And I kind of made note of that as well, just questions and questioning. Some of the questions were more guiding as opposed to turning it on them.
Right.
Sometimes you can say, you know, all food would have started the day. It as a so kind of just switching the questioning and just pre-planning those, you'll already have them ready for when you start. Just question them back to guide them through questioning as opposed to just quickly giving it to them through,
That is the area that I marked as the area of refinement, because you're not doing anything bad, but that I think is the area that's going to be better. You're doing great right where you are. But it's going to take you from a great teacher to the best teacher. And then I just sorry. But I think in terms of your areas of separation and standards and alignment, you're doing it's very evident. Your activities are always connected to those essential standards. And then the entire domain 3, just the learning environment that you have created is exceptional. And we do not see it with teachers very often. That is going to be the foundation of everything you're able to do with your kids. So as you're transitioning to 6th grade, you have those same high expectations for those 6th graders. They may be a little bit more expected, but continue to reinforce those procedures and expectations. Go back and take the time to reteach when they're starting to sound a little bit. Because you're going to be able to really dig into your content as long as those.
Absolutely. Once you lay that foundation, it makes it so much easier to accomplish the rest of it. And really, I mean, 6th grade, kindergarten, you have, that's literally what you have to do in order to, like you said, go from that grade to that exceptional. Because when they see that and they know the expectation, it makes it easier for you to focus on the instructional.
I remember what I was going to say along with your board questions. How do you give control to the kids for goal setting and monitoring their own progress? Okay. So you're doing that right now as a teacher. Right? You're doing all the work. Yeah. So how can you push some of that responsibility, especially with the 6th graders, onto them so that they can take ownership of their learning? Okay, I've set this goal, but in order for me to meet this goal, I've got to do X, Y, and Z within my own learning in order to get there. It's not just reporting, they taking ownership.
Which is what this rubric is all about, taking it from the teacher to the student. Yeah. And that's a very good one.
But you're incredible.
Yes.
I can't wait to see you in 5 years from now. Meeting these district PDs.
I didn't actually take my class. since COVID.
We're gonna come find you and sign you up for PDs. We're gonna be like, oh,